X-Men Apocalypse is the 9th film in the X-Men franchise, and sadly one of the worst. That's not to say it's terrible, because it absolutely is not, but coming off the back of the rock-solid Days of Future Past, this really feels like a backward step. Now let me give you some quick context. My expectations for this film were indeed quite low. From the first time I saw those Apocalypse pictures last summer, I was really quite skeptical, and the trailers didn't suggest to me that this was the big event movie a supervillain like Apocalypse deserves. It says a lot that they gave away the Wolverine cameo ahead of time, because Fox are acutely aware this movie isn't tracking to pull in box office figures like Days of Future Past, and frankly I wouldn't be surprised to see it pull in around 500 million compared to Days of Future Past's almost 800 mil. But now we come to the film itself. I won't speak much of the plot beyond saying that it's an extremely familiar alien invasion type scenario. There's an ancient bad guy who gets woken up, he finds out that human beings are kind of destructive, and decides to wipe the slate clean, but not before recruiting 4 horsemen in Storm, Magneto, Angel and Psylocke to help him out. Enter the X-Men, namely young versions of Jean Grey, Cyclops and Nightcrawler, to save the day. From start to finish, there's just not a lot here that does anything outside of the tired superhero movie formula, which is all the more problematic when you consider how eagerly Days of Future Past broke the mold just 2 years ago. By comparison, this just feels very lazy and template driven. The A to B plot is ridiculously simplistic, and yet it still manages to feel bloated because Bryan Singer has to introduce so many characters and bring them all together. Even at 143 minutes, the film manages to feel rushed, and yet too long at the same time. Singer never lets scenes breathe, everything is just a beat to get through before moving on to the next one. And now let me talk about my biggest problem with this movie, and that's Apocalypse himself. Holy crap, I suspect comic book fans are going to be pretty upset about his depiction here. We were all worried that the small suit didn't make him look imposing enough, and sadly that does carry through to the final movie. He just comes across as a silly, garden variety villain, despite how many times we're told that he's this all-powerful mutant. Poor Oscar Isaac. The guy really does try here, but he can't really do much, and you have to wonder what really attracted him to the part, that literally thousands of other actors could have played to about the same level of competence. Though Apocalypse has a few hair-raising moments, this is a significantly nerfed version of the character, and I strongly suspect that some of the later revelations in particular are going to irritate some people. But hey, we've got a ton of new characters, right? It can't all be bad. Well, most of them are pretty poorly served here. Nightcrawler, Storm, Psylocke and Angel just spend most of the movie hanging out in the background. Jubilee's in it for like 2 or 3 minutes. She says a few lines and then is pretty much gone. And I actually started forgetting that certain characters were even in this movie until they showed up again in the final battle. It's not even like the film feels like it has too many characters, it's just that writer Simon Kinberg didn't make much of an effort to juggle them effectively. Performance-wise though, Ty Sheridan as Cyclops, Alexandra Shipp as Storm and Cody Smith-McPhee as Nightcrawler are really terrific. Although sadly Sophie Turner as Jean Grey is woefully handicapped by quite an atrocious attempt at an American accent. She over-affects almost every line of dialogue, which makes it obvious that we're just watching someone struggling to imitate an American. And when you consider that she's quite obviously going to be a focal character in whatever the next X-Men trilogy ends up being, it doesn't exactly sound good. But hey, what about the action, right? Okay. Well, some of it is admittedly really good. Quicksilver gets a fantastically gimmicky scene that's easily the highlight. Wolverine's cameo is a blast, but I won't say anything more about that. And there's another set piece that really works as well. But a lot of the action just feels very workmanlike in its construction. Like Singer himself doesn't really care. The finale in particular is just this clumsy, stodgy mix of mediocre fight choreography, weirdly bad direction for a Bryan Singer movie, and inconsistent visual effects as well. It also goes on for a really, really long time and left me more exhausted than entertained by the end. But you know what? Even though I've basically taken a giant shit on this movie right now, I actually didn't hate it. I was kept relatively intrigued throughout the 2.5 hour runtime. There were some really fun scenes, some nice character work, and of course, Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy are as awesome as ever as Magneto and Xavier. Also, for those wondering, as I know there's been so much controversy about this online, Jennifer Lawrence doesn't dominate the movie anywhere near as much as the trailers suggest, if that bothers you at all for some reason. Her character arc isn't really that interesting in this movie though, especially compared to Days of Future Past, and you kind of get the sense that she doesn't really care much anymore. but she certainly isn't trotted out excessively just for the sake of it. When I came out of the midnight screening this morning, I really had to think long and hard about whether or not I preferred this movie to Batman v Superman, another film that critics basically took a dump on, and fan response has also been very mixed. I mean, on one hand, Batman v Superman is a far more ambitious and interesting movie, and visually it just destroys X-Men, no doubt. But at least X-Men has pretty sound internal logic and didn't take itself too seriously. I think, honestly, there's not much in it for me. They're both okay movies that are deeply flawed, very disappointing, and not something I'm particularly in a hurry to watch again, I do have to say. It'll certainly be interesting to see where the X-Men franchise goes from here, but you know what? I do want to cut Bryan Singer a little slack. The guy has made 3 good to great X-Men movies so far, so I think he's allowed one miss, if you even consider it that. I'm not quite sure where I stand on it yet. But the film is definitely not hitting the beats it should be, and I think that's going to severely impact its box office. That's my X-Men review. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and thanks for watching. I'll be here from dusk till dawn.